Okay. We have been talking about Cambria, where
Oh,
Ned
yes.
built
Which
his
George
pad.
visited several months ago, or a couple of months ago, right?
Couple of months, I guess. Yeah. Wait a minute. I want, wait a minute, see everybody. Here's this little thing. Aha, there are four of us.
Four of us.
Four
At
of us,
the
yeah.
moment.
Hey, Jorge.
Howdy.
Tim apparently is
Hola.
not going to be with us.
Grammer said, I'm sorry, Ned, what'd you say?
Tim is not going to be with us, I guess.
Right. Grammer called me right now and said, are you hooked up yet? And I said, nope. And he said, well, I'm in the process though. And he said he's a victim of some sort of slow online accessing situation, and he's coming, but it's just slow.
It'll take a while, huh?
Do you have a handle of a dining utensil in front of you?
Yes, that's a spoon,
I thought, yeah.
which is
There
in
it
a
is.
bowl,
Yeah,
in a bowl
yeah.
of shredded wheat.
He's in a bowl which contains cereal.
Good old shredded wheat.
Well, you know, it's quick and cheap and a fix.
Uh-huh.
So Ned, I'm glad you can log on from Cambria.
Yeah, they have a very good internet, so it's not a problem.
Yeah.
Darlene had a Zoom meeting with a women's group, and it was, we had an electric shortage, and the whole of Cambria went out.
Oh,
my.
Right on the day that she had this meeting, and so we tried to hook up the phone, and it worked sort of. You know, use the phone as the connection.
Ned, here's a tip that you may know, but Friday afternoon is the day of the Cambria farmers market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great time to get berries or caramel corn, or you've been there too, Tom. Huh?
Yeah, that's a real fun place.
Yeah, they have fresh juice.
Bayucos is better. Not really.
Not
Could
really.
very well be. Well, they're all
Apparently.
Well, Cayucos has that smoked fish place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that what's her name? Julia Childs touted that place as a favorite place of hers.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Wow.
It's also got this great cookie store.
Yeah, and candy store too. Yeah, so it's no place for dieters.
Ice cream, good ice cream too. You've been up here quite a bit, George Ferrick?
Yes. What happened was when my wife was studying to get her PhD from USC in Slavic studies and doing her dissertation, she was going through struggles of, you know, God damn it, why did I ever get involved in this, etc. But and so every time she finished a chapter, we would go to Cambria. That was like the reward. And then it became and then it became a favorite place for us and our dogs because they have beautiful beaches like the San Simeon Beach. And we like to stay at the Cavalier in San Simeon because it's right on top of a bluff where you can walk right down to the beach. And so we would go there often with our dogs. That was maybe 2 times a year. So we've been there maybe like 24 times or something, a couple dozen. That's been like and we go there, we're going to go there for Thanksgiving coming up with our Denver family. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds great.
Yeah. So we
hope it's not too
yeah,
cold.
yeah, we love it. Yeah.
What, George, what did Kathleen write her thesis on in Slavic studies?
On who's the author of Dr. Zhivago? You know,
Boris Pasternak?
Yeah, Boris Pasternak did some poems
Oh, let me
Mhm.
just interject. I thought when you said, who's the author of Dr. Zhivago? I thought that's what you were telling us she wrote her thesis on.
No, no.
Like, who wrote Shakespeare, you know?
No, it was on Boris Pasternak did some translations of poems into French or French poems into Russian, but the whole point was about translation and how Pasternak, under the Stalinistic regime, could get his own ideas out by the poetry that he would translate, something like that. So it was kind of involved with poetry, translation, that type of thing. Yeah,
Would that be by subtleties of the translation or by his
Right.
selection of poems to translate?
both. I think both. Yeah, both. Yeah.
How clever.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it and give you more information, but it was kind of an interesting twist. Yeah, interesting explanation. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, you know, he always had that theme song in the background distracting him, you know?
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite movies.
Well, Betty and I just watched it relatively recently again. Or a
Did
big
you?
part. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Great
it's
movie.
it's a movie, I watch it, oh, at least every 5 years or.
Do
you
you?
know, so,
What do you
yeah.
like? What do you like about it?
Put it this way, my favorite scene in it, Chicago and his wife and his son have found their way to this idyllic country place.
Yeah.
What's the name of it? Zarikinov or something akin to that. And, you know, they're going to be, he's out of the war at last, and here's a chance to regroup and rebuild. And he goes into this town near which they are, go to the library, and lo and behold, who's there?
Yeah.
But Miss Laura. And, you know, he just like, oh my God, I'm doomed. You know, I mean, we've been
She is beautiful.
War. I mean, this cotton picking war, the Bolshevik Revolution, geography. I did everything I could to get away from this woman, you know. And now what? Oh God! And so, you know, they couple into bed right away. And you know, inevitably, back to Tom's question about human soul and freedom and all that, you know. I mean, if they weren't predestined to, you know, let that to have that happen once they were both there. So he struggles with it, and he decides, nuts, I'm not going to do this anymore. It's just not right. And he's going back, you know, he's told her that, and she gives her Julie Christie wide-eyed, teary look, you know, and which is, you know, the prevailing motif in the movie. She's always doing that. And he's on his horse, and he's just so,
This is one scene?
Well, no, it's a series of scenes. No, I'm getting to my scene.
Oh, we haven't got there yet.
This is all preparatory. And he's on his horse, and he's, you know, and he's just so sad, but so resolute. And all of a sudden, out of this forest, you hear, and he's surrounded by people on horses, so, you know, partisans. And this guy says, "Comrade Doctor, you are coming with us. We need a doctor. We are Soviet partisans. We shoot deserters." And off they go with him a prisoner, you know, and that's my favorite scene. You gotta watch it knowing it's George's favorite. I mean, you could miss it. Another scene I always remember is when he's with the partisans, there are these pendejo kids from this military academy that are coming out to fight. You know, they're all 12, 13, 14, and they're czarist idealism, holy Russia, and they're marching into this field of wheat. And the the Soviet partisans just cut them down. Remember, with the machine guns?
Yeah.
Just cut them down. And it's all, you know, to mix my movies, sunrise, sunset.
That's another favorite movie. That's a great movie.
It's a good movie. I wouldn't say.
Oh, I think it's a great movie too. The
And
music.
besides, I like the way
Story.
Pasternak looked, you know, with that most handsome man I've ever seen, I think. I'm speaking of Sharif.
Yeah, Omar Sharif, yeah.
And
Remember in-
Sharif
remember
had
in
this
Dol-
great half-life of beauty from about Zhivago to Lawrence of Arabia.
Hmm.
He was beautiful. And then he burned out, you know, and every year or so he aged 10 years. By the end of his life, he was just a waste, you know.
Remember the movie Dolly?
Yeah. Oh no.
What's her name? Called him beautiful, you know, more beautiful than me.
That wasn't the name of it, Dolly, I don't think. Did you talk about the one with Barbara Streisand?
Barbara Streisand, yeah. No,
Yeah.
it wasn't Dolly. Who is it? Oh, that's right. It was her first one where she sang and it was great.
Oh, I can't remember the name of that movie. Funny Girl. No.
Funny. Yeah, it
About
is.
Fanny Bryce, and he plays this no good gambler type of. Is Pasternak, George, a good poet?
I think so, yeah. I'll do a little research. How's that? And get back to you on this.
Okay.
See if I can, yeah. Yeah,
I thought he was a very tedious novelist when I forced myself to read Zhivago.
mm-hmm.
I started it, didn't finish it.
Well,
I think I read it all the way through back in the seminary days.
did you find it tedious, Tom?
I think so. But, you know, I guess I had my Russian period around that when, you know, I was consuming Dostoevsky and Pasternak and those types, and can't remember a damn thing about them. But
Did you read War and Peace?
I don't think I got through War and Peace.
That's tedious.
I've never even tried it.
No,
It's
maybe.
supposed to be terrific.
Yeah.
Well, there were at that time. Remember, there were also the comic book series called Classics Illustrated,
Oh, yeah.
which was a really fun way of getting exposure. You know, I guess maybe a generation before the Cliff Notes, getting exposure to all that kind of stuff.
I remember teaching at Salesian. This would have been about 1967, 68. And I had to assign this class David Copperfield. And I read a couple of chapters, and then I flipped to the end to see how many pages it had. And I say, there's no way I'm going to read this. I don't have time for this. And so I taught it from the Cliff Notes.
Oh.
Shame on me.
You,
But
you
that's
made the
what I
kids.
did.
You made the kids read it, but you didn't.
Talk about being a fraud, right?
Didn't you go through Evelyn Wood's program?
Yeah,
Well,
Reading?
just what Father McIntyre did, remember, in the seminary. At the end of ninth grade, Ned, you were gone, but
believe it or not, I still have her notes.
Are you
Oh, my.
reading?
Yeah,
Oh my gosh! Right at
from the
hand.
seminary class. It says, yeah. Wow.
I
Yep,
tried to go through that and
speed reading.
couldn't do it. I am a very, very slow reader.
It's more enjoyable not to be rushed, I find.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, you get
Yeah.
to,
Bishop John Ward, who has been mentioned recently,
he doesn't-
he does
Oh,
not
what?
defy classification. He is very easily classified. You can use a number of labels, all of which meaning the same thing, but
idiot.
no, there's there's nothing creeping outside the box. Part, maybe
What?
because the box is empty, but there's nothing creeping outside the box with him.
What a pendejo.
Yeah,
but you know, if you Google his name, you'll find a wonderful tribute to him by some journalist, some Los
Frank Weber?
Angeles. No, it wasn't Frank Weber, but if you do it right now, you could find it. And it's praising him as kind of some ultimate churchman, which he was, I guess, in line with your description, Tom, but certainly inside the box for sure.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
maybe
and inside the box and snarly. You know, everybody outside of it.
Yeah,
that's a good way to describe him.
Well,
Barking.
it's kind of the ultimate and kind of hierarchical. Talk about the actual axial periods, AXIAL. It's really hierarchical to the extreme. You know, one of the things that kind of galled me was, in terms of patriarchy, was at confirmation. I can remember at St. Ignatius in Highland Park, Monsignori would come and so forth, and then after the confirmation, there was a big feast in the rectory. You know, maybe 3 or 4 tables set up for some fancy dinner. And the good nuns who actually trained the people and spent hours with the
Yeah.
people confirmed were not included or totally out of it. You know, it just struck me as the ultimate and kind of my, Bishop Ward type living.
Yep.
It was.
Yeah, it was.
But
Yeah,
I'll bet the nuns wouldn't have wanted to have been there. I mean,
probably
did you-
not. Yeah, probably not. That's a
you-
good point.
Did you attend?
No, I can't remember being there. Yeah.
Did you, Tom, any of these famous post-confirmation bashes?
very, very few. Way back in the early days, I did.
Yeah.
Now, when I became pastor, it was kind of neat out in Claremont. We would have a dinner at a local Mexican restaurant. Gabino Zavala was always the confirming prelate, almost always. And we, almost went out of our way to try to get him because he was a lot of fun. And it was hard work to confirm in Claremont because we had 2 confirmations, one at 10 in the morning, one at 2 in the afternoon, or 3 in the afternoon. So we had a nice lunch in this Mexican restaurant. And basically, I never invited local clergy to our confirmations, except on a very small scale. And a few of them came, but most of them, for one thing, our sanctuary wasn't large enough for them. But everybody involved in confirmation, the Catholic school teachers, the religious ed people, RCIA people, they all were invited to that luncheon. And of course, Gabino, as sociable as he was, just had a grand time, and we had a grand time with him.
Sounds pretty inclusive.
It
Yeah,
was.
it was great, actually.
It was.
Yeah, well, good for you, Tom. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, my pastor where I grew up was, a typical priest of his time and place, except he was meaner than most of them. But everybody with a Roman collar within X miles would be there. And
Mhm.
I can only imagine how Bishop Manning reacted to that, or even McIntyre. It was so clerical and so over the top. I mean, I mean, supposedly, this was national. That's just wasn't LA. This was every place in the country.
Mhm.
You know, it was the priests would get drunker than skunks. And
Yeah. You know, and I had a bad experience with that in around 1974 or so. A confirmation at St. Margaret Mary's in Lomita. I was associate in Carson, right next door. And it was one of those clerical dinners followed by drinks and so on and so forth. And
I mean, the laity, we have to have our drinks before dinner.
and Jim Hansen left there, and in trying to turn around, he drove up on the sidewalk, and everybody was sort of kidding him about that and all. But it was going back from that particular event that Jim Hansen had his rather tragic accident that killed him 2 weeks later.
Really?
Oh,
So and pastor there,
Jeez.
Cremens, Harold Cremens, never got over it. Never got over it. And I don't know, couple of years later, I mean, he was extremely depressed. He found comfort in, I think it was the religious ed director, and a couple of years later, you know, he left priesthood, and the two of them got married. But it was very sad for him, because at that time Harold Cremens was my spiritual director,
Oh, wow.
who
Jeez.
was basically helping me out through a quote love relationship with somebody in my parish that, thank you Lord, did not ever go anywhere. But it was really sad to see that, you know, that particular kind of event essentially took the life of one of our pastors, and certainly took the spirit of another one.
So did he feel responsible in some way, or just
He did.
deeply affected, responsible?
He felt responsible. He
Uh-huh.
could not shake that. He could not get through
Really,
it, except
Uh-huh.
look.
Yeah.
you know, I just remembered a former bishop of Phoenix, I think Green by name, I think,
Yeah.
was driving home from one of these and hit some guy and killed him, and kept driving and was prosecuted for hit and run. Remember that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
shades of John Berger.
yeah, but that wasn't it. Well, was John Berger driving back from a confirmation?
No, but he was driving to celebrate mass at some parish in Camarillo, and he was just drunk as hell, and killed a woman.
Oh, geez.
And that
On his way to mass, Ned?
on his way to celebrate mass.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And
Must have been
and
quite.
Well,
was
in
the end
those
of it.
days, you didn't have to do anything except go up to the altar and, you know, do the right motions and mumble things, and
Yeah.
Then if you weren't facing the people, they wouldn't even.
No.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's pretty sad. Yeah.
Poor old Berger. You know, I liked him. I hated the way he taught. Well, he didn't teach actually, but he was a sad, lonely person. He drafted. Remember Lou Del Castillo? He drafted Lou and would have him into his room, and they'd talk for an hour about the world, And he thought that Lou was so worldly wise that he wanted to learn from him. And you know, I found that very, I don't know, sad.
Wow.
Well,
Well, let's switch things slightly. You want to go in a different direction with Tom? I really like those attachments about Roncalli that you sent.
oh, yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and
that, you know,
it kind of raised, yeah,
go ahead. I'm
it
sorry.
kind of
Whoops.
raised the question for me, and maybe I missed it earlier, was how did you get interested in Turkey? And secondarily, you know, the little piece that you wrote for the parish newsletter about Roncalli, and you
Yeah.
mentioned that his time in Turkey may have had some effect, of course, I guess.
Oh,
you
I
might
think
say,
it was
Yeah.
very formative.
yeah, on his
He loved the
ecumenical
Turks,
Uh-huh.
and therefore he knew about Islam. He loved the Turks; they loved him, and it, it was just extremely formative. It was
So did
during
that
World-
lead?
it
Yeah.
was during World War II also when he, used his Turkish connections and church connections in Istanbul to save a lot of Jews. So there was a another part of it. I haven't read that piece by Marmara for some time, so I'm not too familiar with the details, but I think that is the only source of information about, biographical information about his time in Turkey. Rinaldo Marmara was the head of not head, he was secretary for the Turkish Catholic Bishops' Conference. And of course, most of the Catholic bishops in Turkey were Italian.
Huh.
Either Italian or I think
Interesting.
there were one or two French. But so, and in the house behind the cathedral in Istanbul, and I can send you some pictures of that. It's very, very interesting because obviously everything has to be behind a wall. You can't be public about your Catholic or Christian religion there. So once you get behind the wall, you can, have all your statues and whatever else you want. But across the street between the cathedral and the papal nunciature is called Papa Roncalli Street, and I've got a picture of the placard on the side of the building, that identifies the street, and it actually is found on a map. You Google it on Google Maps, and it will locate where it is for you in Istanbul. How I got interested in Turkey was back when we did in 2000, the year 2000, we had a diocesan priest's pilgrimage to Turkey and Greece. And it started in Turkey, but we all were thinking, oh, let's get Turkey out of the way so we can get to Greece. That's where it's really fabulous. And every one of us were enthralled with the hospitality, the food, and the immense amount of the remnants of the early church history, not just St. Paul, but Nicaea and the ruins of basilicas in in various cities, various locations. And it just kind of entranced me. So a few years later, I went on a study tour. I had a time for a sabbatical, went on a study tour for 2 months
Huh.
in Turkey and Greece. And once again, Greece was not very impressive. The attitude of the Orthodox to Roman Catholics was, shall we say, cold at its most euphemistically favorable. They hated us, in other words. And in Turkey, there was, this was kind of at the height of the opening. Turkey was still very secular in its governance and culture at that time, but it was opening to be a little more inclusive in the 90s and 2000s. Prior to that, it was what I would call militantly secular. That any religion, including Islam, was at best tolerated and marginalized. And so the secularization at that time in the 2000s was, I think, opening up in a way that I had the fantasy, as did many other people, that very possibly Turkey could be a model for how an Islamic state could relate constructively to the rest of the world. Things went south after, say, 2013, 2010.
But slowly.
Somewhere around that. So things went south in Turkey when Erdogan really began to decide that he was able to get away with being an authoritarian son of a bitch.
Yeah.
And engineer the constitution, engineer the government to kind of give him a lifetime position as the dear leader.
Huh.
That's when things, truly went south, and he scapegoated Fethullah Gulen and his movement to the extent of basically all he had to do was anybody he didn't like, he would declare them a terrorist. And that gave him the legitimacy in the eyes of the government to basically do away with any of his enemies. But during that heyday of the first decade of the 2000s, it was wonderful to just go there and trace not just the footsteps of St. Paul, but get a handle on where the early church was developing over the first 3 or 4 centuries. Because what we call the Holy Land was not the place, but Antioch became the center, even more so than Rome. Antioch became the center of where Christianity went from there. And I found that, absolutely fascinating, because we never studied, with Eberhard or anybody, we never studied what was going on in the East. And there was a hell of a lot going on in the East.
Well, more than was going on in the West, right?
Right.
Doctrinally. And...
Right. I think that the way that the popes got their inflated monarchical exclusive power was basically there was a power vacuum in the West. And, north of the Alps and south of the Alps, you just had a whole bunch of petty city-states and their barons and leaders and whatnot fighting with one another. And Rome became it's kind of a desolate backwater. And the responsibility to kind of keep Rome alive fell to the popes during, I would say the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th centuries. So that, to my mind, that was a very interesting generality. And that time, a lot of problems with the Byzantine Empire, but at least it held together as an empire. Even though it did not, it was weak enough that it couldn't withstand the attack of Arabs who were energized by Islam. I think that's the way I would.
But it took them centuries to bring it down.
It took them
I mean,
centuries.
they whittled
to
away at
complete
it.
that. Yeah,
steadily.
yeah. I mean, they conquered North Africa fast, and Spain fast. And I think that was largely because North Africa became unstable because of the various controversies with the heretical movement. I think it's Montanism was one, but the Visigoths, they were Aryans, and the Visigoths, they were the invaders that Saint Augustine wrote the City of God about. That our secular earthly culture civilization is very unstable, and we have to depend on God being the ruler, not we can't be protected by kings and emperors and that sort of thing. So there was so much controversy going on in North Africa because of the disputes of heresies and the invasion of the Visigoths and Vandals, that and Spain too was dominated by Aryan Visigoths a century prior. So the Arabs, like I say, energized, I think, by Islam, found North Africa to be just low-hanging ripe fruit for them. So that's my take anyway on what was happening there. The Byzantine Empire at least managed to hold together, even if like you say, over the course of centuries, at first the Arabs, but then the Turks went, and there were two groups of Turks. First, the Seljuk Turks, and they had been newly converted to Islam. They made tremendous inroads. Then the Ottoman Turks kind of came along and conquered them and essentially finished off the Byzantine Empire. So,
was the Fourth Crusade a big part of that? I mean, had we just disemboweled it almost, or?
Yeah. in simple words, in one syllable, the Fourth Crusade, yeah, we were supposed to be helping the Byzantines, the Greeks, to stave off the invasion of the Turks, particularly in the territories that they were trying to regain in the Holy Land. But the crusading armies just thought, hey, here's some low-hanging fruit for us, when they got to Constantinople. And And of course, that's where we get all this proliferation of relics coming over in the late Middle Ages. Saint Chapelle and St. Mark's getting all kinds of relics. Where do they get them from? And where did all the sales of pig bones throughout Europe?
So they were like the Amazon of relics.
They were, because one of the things that the Patriarch of Constantinople did in its rivalry with Rome, for one thing, but realizing that we are really the center of the Christian world, they did a lot of collecting of the relics from the Holy Land in the Middle East, and placed them in their great churches. The Church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople. Footnote here. The church, St. Mark's in Venice, was modeled after the Church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople. But they assiduously collected relics of all 12 apostles. So the bones and remnants, sometimes maybe supposedly, of the 12 apostles, were all enshrined at the Church of the Holy Apostles. The Crusaders came, conquered all of that, and said, hey, we can do really, really good business here. And took those relics and brought them and distributed them. And that's why every now and then you find some bones of some apostle, significant relics being formally delivered from the Vatican to the Patriarchate of Constantinople.
They ought to give back. I think we talked about this. There's a beautiful icon at St. Mark's in the chapel when you come in off to the left of Mary holding the infant Jesus. And Ned, you got a copy of it, right? Because I was so taken with it. I brought back, it was on a postcard at the bookstore at St. Mark's, and I brought back several of them and had them framed and gave them to various folks and kept one for myself. Then I found out the story that it was plundered by the Crusaders. And so I gave my copy to a Greek Orthodox colleague of mine at the time, saying, I'm not entitled to have this, I mean,
right.
But why doesn't the Patriarch of Venice give it back?
Yeah.
It's a great icon, right, Ned? Can you visualize?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much.
And
So
it was their big, big magic icon. I mean, like, it was what they carried through the streets when there were plagues and that type of thing. Very much part of Constantinople, I found later.
Yeah. Yeah, Constantinople is just an absolutely fascinating place. And another part of the story is the Turks really never changed the name. Istanbul is a sort of a corrupt pronunciation of the Greek Istanpolis or Istanpolem, which meant to the big city. So that's what the common ordinary people, even back in the olden days, spoke of Constantinople not so much by the term Constantinople, but by the term the city. I'm going to the city.
Yeah.
And the kind of Turkification of that expression became Istanbul.
Interesting.
but it was never really formally known as Istanbul until after 1923 when they had the revolution, the Ataturk's revolution.
How do you think pilgrims are being received in Turkey now? American pilgrims.
I personally think they are probably being received very well, at least if they are under the auspices of some kind of recognized tour pilgrimage organizing company. And the reason is they bring much needed money.
Money. Yeah.
And the government of Turkey still seems to be interested in excavating and restoring some of the ancient Christian sites. And I think some of it may be really altruistic, not just the money, but hey, this still is part of our heritage. And you know, there's warm and chilly relations between the patriarch and the Turkish government. Turkish government has not come through on a number of promises, like opening the Halki Seminary on one of the islands not too far from Istanbul. And you know, they've done some things that obviously are going to rub Orthodox Christians the wrong way, like turning Hagia Sophia back into a mosque. Practically speaking, for a pilgrim, a Christian pilgrim visiting Hagia Sophia, the practical ramification of it is, I suspect that the Turkish government is taking better care of it as a mosque than they did as a museum. And they don't charge admission to a mosque, whereas the admission to the museum was pretty substantial. Other than that, I would suspect that the experience of a visitor would be, well, they wouldn't see the at least for the central part, they wouldn't see the marble flooring because that would be covered with a carpet. The artwork was not covered over, but simply emphasized and de-emphasized by lighting during the prayer times. At least that's my understanding. Now, that was certainly the case in a couple of other places. There was one other place that the church actually of Hagia Sophia, also in Nicaea, which is where the seventh council, second council of Nicaea was held, the one that condemned iconoclasm. And that was in the, 7th century, 8th century? That church was a museum kind of in ruins, and back in, I don't know, 2011, 2010, 2011, the government decided to restore it as a mosque. They put a roof on it and built a platform in the center that was carpeted. And it had been a mosque before, so it had the, you know, the prayer niche and that sort of thing already. And the last time that I went there, it was kind of nice because you could still go around the walls and see the ancient Christian remnants of it, but they didn't charge admission. So that's kind of the reason for a lot of my fascination with with Turkey. Um, Laodicea, the first time going to Turkey with that study tour in 2006, Laodicea was a mound. By the last time, it was actually restored as that they had done significant excavations and rebuilt some of the, I won't say rebuilt, but identified and put up some columns, put rocks back on top of each other and that sort of thing, in a way that it became a tourist site, an archaeological site that you could now, at that time, after 10 years or so, get admission to go around and see the remnants of what Laodicea would have looked like back in the time of the apostles. Colossae, which is near Laodicea, still remains a mound. And if you go there, you can see bits and pieces of marble sticking out of the dirt on this hill. And that's all there is for Colossae. That's on somebody, what would you call it? Somebody's list to try to get funding for excavating. But that, to my knowledge, hasn't been done yet.
What about Corinth and Ephesus?
Well, Corinth is in Greece.
Okay.
That's a very, very interesting site. Ephesus has continually been kind of excavated, and it's a fabulously interesting place to visit, because you've got kind of the main old street there that ends up in that iconic library of Celsus, and then off to the right of it is the amphitheater, or the theater, I should say, where St. Paul had his run-in with the silversmiths. And then right down the hill from the theater is the double church of Mary, Theotokos, which is where they held the Council of Ephesus, which most tours, because the evangelicals stick with St. Paul, most tours don't go to the Church of the Theotokos. And of course, on the other side of the mountain, the rather imposing mountain to the south, I think of it, is Mount Nightingale. On the other side of that is the House of Mary. And that's got its own very interesting story of rediscovery by the Vincentians and the Daughters of Charity in about 100 years, well, no, about 130 years ago now.
And this is where John and Mary were supposed to have lived?
Right.
Wow.
Right. And it's very interesting because the nun, whose name I forget, she was stationed in a hospital at Smyrna. But she was reading the writings of Catherine Emmerich. And she thought, well, I wonder if it's possible to find this House of Mary from her description of it, because she gave a very detailed description of the location. And she and a couple of priests searched, and in the one spot on the slope of that mountain where it was described, you could see both the city on one side and the harbor on the other side. they discovered the remnants of a small shrine, which looked like a house that had been built into a shrine, and discovered a few things around, and then discovered that the local Greek Christian townspeople said, yes, that's the holy place of the Virgin. So there's, I'm not doing justice to the story, but it's a very, very interesting story. I'm obviously extremely skeptical of these visions of Catherine of Emmerich in particular. But by the way, it's her vision also that contributed a lot to the non-scriptural parts of The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson. And her descriptions of the sorrowful passion and so on gave impetus to Gibson's gore.
Yeah.
But so that's kind of impressive. There's another spot in Ephesus, and then I'll shut up, but it's called the Cave of St. Paul, which was rediscovered in the late 1990s. And in excavating it, they, painstakingly took some of the layers off of the walls and discovered the only portrait of St. Paul, possibly one of the earliest portraits of St. Paul. The only portrait, definitely, that they have ever found in Ephesus itself. And it's an interesting setting because with the legend or the acts, let's say, of Thecla, it shows Paul preaching to Thecla, who is sitting in a window, and Thecla's mother, Theoclea, is on the other side of Paul, trying to shut him up. And it's a very, very interesting portrait. I can send you some links to that if you like.
Yeah,
Sure.
That'd be great.
what do you make of that? What's the theological interpretation?
Well, the story of Thecla was that she was in Iconium, which is now Konya. She was a young woman in a family who was about to be married off to a suitor, rather wealthy family, and she became enamored of Paul's work, teaching, and so on, and wanted to follow him. And the mother, of course, and her fiance tried very hard to prevent her. And according to, you read the apocryphal acts of Paul and Thecla, and it becomes kind of evident that one reason, if she really did exist, and if the acts have any basis in historical reality, it's kind of evident that Paul was a little bit embarrassed by her enthusiasm and sort of did everything he could to kind of separate himself from her, which may be one reason why, if she really did exist, she doesn't feature in the New Testament. But to the extent that she was refused baptism in her enthusiasm, so she went ahead and baptized herself. And then there's fanciful stories.
That's a true believer.
Right. Which is one reason why, of course, she is highly regarded by many of today's feminist Catholics.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. So did she ever get married, or did she give that up?
No. She married Christ. And she eventually formed a monastery of women in Silifke, I think it is, which is down near the coast, the Mediterranean coast. And a couple of times we visited the remnants of that monastery too. So, there's just lots of interesting lore in our history that is rather fun to try to piece together and see, what's happening in relation to those places. And
Tom, in RCIA, these folks, the candidates, et cetera, just are drawn to Catholic lore like, bees to honey. They everything from, I mean, if one were to put on a lesson in RCIA about the revelations to Catherine Emmerich, there would be people there that would, do you know where I can get her book? And just eating it up. And at St. Charles, they do this sacristy tour that I usually skip going to, but and this is a thurible, and this is a censer, and here's the boat, and the boat is what we keep the incense in. And, and here's the sacred spoon to get it from the boat into the censer. And it just drives me crazy. People just lap this up. And the team, I among them, we fall prey to it because somebody, our head, John Genova, is a wonderful guy, will start talking about some of the other team members, well, now in Advent, you see, they only wear purple vestments on Sundays, and only, I guess, 2 of the 4 or 3 of the 4, because there's Laetare Sunday in there, and then they wear pink, and here's why. And in the olden days, we used to, when the church, when men were men and Catholics were Catholics, and Wednesday, Ember Days in Lent. Tom, before we leave Turkey, or at least Byzantium, have you gone through the Byzantine exhibits, room or rooms or whatever they are at the Metropolitan Museum in New York?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Because I've never spent much time in New York, and that was one place that I did not sadly get to.
Yeah, well,
New York,
Betty and
New
I
York for me
twice-
has always been a stop on the way to somewhere else, and I wish
I think it's worth parachuting into for a few days.
I
But
think it would be too.
but we've been to the Metropolitan Museum twice, and each time it was like, oh well, gotta go now, and they have a whole huge Byzantine Empire exhibition. My other question is, of books about Byzantium, do you recommend John Julius Norwich's 2 volumes, or is there better stuff?
I don't know. He's the one that I sort of cut my teeth on.
Yeah, I mean, he's
Yeah.
not a professional historian, but he did a hell of a job in his history of Sicily that we talked about a while back.
Yeah. The other one that I found very interesting was anything by John Freely, Freely. He approaches it a little bit like a tour guide. He's got several very good tour books, but he also is very fascinating in delving into, some of the historical stuff. And the neat thing I think about John Julian Norwich and John Freely are that, they're not really historians, but they've got a deep appreciation for getting into the history.
Yeah, I thought it would be very interesting. I recently read this book on the Orthodox churches, the one I had sent the review about.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And the book's better than the review. I mean, what's his name? The guy that wrote the review, McCulloch, has a lot of his own baggage, I think, and probably
Mhm.
everything he does. But the author of the book, his name escapes me. He's an Orthodox priest in the Romanian Orthodox Church, but he's British by nationality, and I guess I think he was Catholic originally, and then converted to Orthodox. But he concedes when he's going through the 19th and 20th centuries in Orthodoxy that their occupation by the Turks, I mean, all the Orthodox lands, or at least the majority of them, were in the Balkans and were, under the under Turkish rule for centuries and centuries.
Mhm.
And he pretty much says that as a result of that, rate intellectually as a church compared to the Catholics, and just the state of their scholarship, he said. He says it very explicitly.
Mhm.
Very much suffered in that
Yeah.
period.
Excuse me, I'm getting a little bit antsy because I need to use a little room across the hall here. And
Well,
I'm
feel free.
You're gonna
sorry
go
to
watch
interrupt at this point, but
let's take a seventh inning break. Hey,
Did you watch the Dodger game,
Congratulations.
George?
yeah, we did watch it. Yeah. Yep. Down. It wasn't, I guess the pitching, I guess, what could you say? It wasn't a very offensive game, was it?
No?
Not at all. It just all hinged on who would get one run, and then it was tied up, and yeah.
You're not paying any attention right now to the Dodgers.
I just, last year I was, hanging on every game, but
Yeah,
this one, I haven't. No.
yeah. I think the
Yeah.
umpire made 3 bad calls. There was one, yeah, there was one pitch. Do you remember that? It would have been ball 4, and Brandon, or I don't know, somebody would have gotten on base, but instead it was a strikeout. And the graphics they used to show the pitch, it was definitely
Yeah,
outside, but
and that
instead of
cut
having,
against the Dodgers, right?
this was a Giants batter that would have been on first base.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they could have had a rally or something, but instead there was an extra out.
So the
The guy
Dodgers
was,
lost, huh? The
No,
Dodgers.
Dodgers
no,
won
the Dodgers won.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
on a
yeah.
controversial call.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that doesn't mean the Giants would have won anyway, because it just would have meant that it wouldn't have been, that pitch wouldn't have been the end of it. I mean, he could have screwed up on the next pitch, but
Yeah. Well, this dude Schwarber, man, I'm quite taken with him. I love to watch it because he's a throwback. He
Oh, yeah.
looks like a 1950s, 40s, or 30s ball player.
Oh yeah, the guy that throws it from the side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he was is a very I'm here to win type pitcher and all that. But Betty is really a fan, so she's
Is
been
she?
watching the game every night. So I hang around till I get bored or sleepy and
Yeah,
then go to
right.
bed. But I thought it was a terrific game.
Yeah, we watched the whole game. Yeah, yeah, we did. Yeah, it was pins
Yeah.
and needles there, because it got to the 9th inning and it was 0-0, right?
Yeah.
Until the
Yeah.
Dodgers got,
No, I
Yeah,
think it was
I-
1-1 or something.
So
no,
the
I think it
Dodgers-
was, no, I think it was actually,
Go ahead, George.
yeah, it was either the 8th or the 9th inning where the Dodgers got a run and then the Giants tied it up. Yeah,
Yeah. The thing is that about this season, these two teams are very excellent baseball teams. And, the Giants won what, George, 107 games during
Yeah.
the season,
And
and
the-
the Dodgers
and
won fewer.
106, yeah, by one.
Yeah.
106 games. And at one point in the game, the person announced that both teams had the exact same stats for the game. They had like 6 runs. They had 0 errors. They had the same amount of people on base. The same score was 0-0. The game was nip and tuck. It was exactly, yeah, even.
Yeah, I mean, it's really excellently played baseball, but should be.
Yeah.
It's the major
Are the
leagues. What the hell?
Are the Dodgers in the World Series now?
No, they have to prevail yet over the
Atlanta
Yeah.
Braves.
the
I think they're-
winners of the Eastern Division of the
Yeah.
National.
National League.
Yeah, but they still have to get past the Atlanta Braves, right, to get into it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a long schlep, but anyway.
Yeah.
Tom, I am very nervous about going to a Muslim country. I just don't trust them, I mean, shame on me, but
Well, I would be too. I have no idea what Muslim country I would be in any sense interested in visiting today. because
Morocco?
Maybe.
Mhm.
What was that, George?
Morocco?
Oh,
Or how about Tunisia?
I don't
Africa.
know. I just don't.
Less stable than
I-
Morocco.
I definitely got enamored with Turkey and the kind of Islam that was part of the civic and cultural life at that time was sort of what I would see as a model for the rest of the Middle East. But that has all gone to hell now.
Oh, Oregon.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the whole rest of the Middle East has gone to hell too. I mean, at
Yeah.
one time, wasn't Lebanon really a model for
Oh, absolutely. In the
Christian
50s.
and Muslim relations? And now it's
Mhm.
Yeah, it was a wonderful country, I hear.
it's to use an expression near and dear to somebody who is near and dear to all of us, it's a shithole.
It seems like, well, Tom, this brings us to that article about the axial consciousness. You said you would
Yeah,
maybe have some, but it seems like we're going backwards from whatever axial period was leaning in a positive direction. It's
Yeah.
like all the,
Yeah. and I
in our,
personally question whether, I mean, the whole concept of the axial period, let's say from the 8th to the 2nd century BC, that in itself is very controversial, but there is certainly something very interesting about the development of culture and the development of religion, kind of going from polytheism all over the place to monotheism. And the great figures of the great world religions basically developing at that time. I think that's a very interesting concept. I'd have to go back. What spurred me on that thinking was one of the great courses
yeah,
You mentioned that, yeah.
on the axial age, and I found out just now that just yesterday that I have access to those courses because I bought them
Mhm.
15 years ago.
really.
And
Yeah, you can stream them, can't you?
pardon me?
You can stream them.
You can stream them. I don't think now you can download them. Back then I could download them,
Mm.
but I will have to look a little bit more into that. But George, also regarding the Byzantine Empire and Christianity and ancient religions and ancient cultures, the name that I have tended to follow is a man as Ken Harrell, Harl. He has a number of really, really good courses on the Great Courses series. And so most of my knowledge really does come from that sort of info,
Mhm.
rather than reading too many books, even though I've got a whole bunch of books, a lot of them on the library right here. Interesting one I'm looking at right now is called Justinian's Flea.
FLEA?
Right. Because prior to the Black Death, the greatest, most extensive and deadly plague was during the time of Justinian.
Hmm.
And it was the same, it was bubonic plague. And it was also spread by rats and fleas. So,
One of the guys.
and that too, may have changed the course of history. And certainly weakened the Byzantine Empire in a way that they couldn't sustain themselves, shall we say, over the course of time. But
Yeah,
So do you
I-
think that's happening to the United States? We're being, once I was at, do you remember Z Gallery, the store where you could get posters and stuff? Did you have that? Z Gallery, it was
I
called.
don't remember that, no.
Yeah, it was a store you could get posters, and I saw a poster that was maybe 4 feet tall and a foot wide, and it showed civilizations from the beginning of time, and the ones that were more powerful were kind of bulging out,
Mhm.
and the Egyptian and et cetera, Roman, Greek, et cetera, and then it had the current, call it what you will, the West or maybe even the United States,
Mhm.
but all the other ones kind of they went from being bulging out to kind of the air taken out of them, and it just struck me that something's happening here.
Yeah.
It seems like, what do you think about that? When you depict I mean, it's hard for us to have a view of it, right? When you talk about the actual age being 8 centuries before to the 2nd century, that's, we're just aware of what's happening in our own century here,
Yeah.
who are the players here and now, and it's hard to get the big picture, but
But are we building up some kind of a unified consciousness?
Mhm.
well, it
that is
it
really
doesn't seem
significant,
that way.
or
It's-
are we fragmented all over the place, or are we simply
Well, you
splitting
can't
up
say
into
the
two
United
armed
States
camps?
of America, it's a disunited states.
Yeah,
I agree.
You can't really say the United States of America anymore.
yeah. And China, whom we have supported, whom we have, eagerly facilitated them to develop into an increasing economic power simply because we like we like
Goods.
to buy their cheap shit. Uh,
Well, and we thought it would promote world stability.
we
too.
thought it would, yeah. That was Nixon's gift.
Yeah, and William Jefferson.
Yeah. But now I'm not sure what can stop China. I don't think anything can stop China. In one part, because they are becoming increasingly economically powerful, they're becoming influential in Africa. And that is hopeful because it's good for the Africans, but it's scary because African nations are going to become satellites of China. And of course, the means that they're doing it with is still an authoritarian communistic system of government.
And that might bring them down ultimately. Look at the COVID-19. I mean, one of the reasons the virus has gotten as prolific as it has is the local bureaucrats in Wuhan province just couldn't bring themselves to report up the line that they had a problem here. and until it was, unmistakable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they kind of castigated the doctor that was speaking, saying the truth about it.
Yeah, well, they drove him to his death. you
Yeah,
know,
they did. Yeah, yeah,
and it's kind of like Chernobyl in the former
Right.
Soviet Union. So, yeah, and they're
Yeah.
having a real estate crisis of some sort in their economy. That's
Yeah, that's true.
I don't follow it, but
Is it
um,
this, is it the same problem with real estate values going up in Beijing so that workers don't have places to live or something similar or
I think that's part. I think
something
I've
like
read
that? Uh-huh.
Yeah. But I don't know, Tom. I have gone through various stages with respect. None of them consistent with respect to my view of the United States of America. Most recently, I just admitted I'd become a frank American exceptionalist. I just thought, with all of our flaws, we're the country, we're the city seated on the hill, and the indispensable nation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Boy, we're not. If there was anything to that, and I think there was. I mean, basically, Lincoln, Wilson, and FDR, the latter two by their rhetoric, I think, really cast the United States into this country that had the image of a force for good and a force for idealism in the world. And where are we now? After Trump's going to cut, it's pretty clear that he's going to get, well, it's pretty clear there's a real strong possibility he's going to get reelected. And imagine that, Donald Trump unfettered, back for a second term.
He would be worse. He would be worse, wouldn't he? Because
Oh, yeah.
unless he could change the rules like Erdogan and Putin, and so that he could be reelected again and again, that could happen too.
Well,
It's hard to imagine.
or the
it's-
equally scary thing, maybe even more so, is that Trump will be elected vicariously. Trump will come to power vicariously with, he is creating Trumpian clones,
Yeah,
whether they're
Yes.
whether they're his own family that we have heard very little about lately, or whether it's, whoever his guest list is at Mar-a-Lago. Anybody who ran in 2024 with his support would probably win the Republican nomination and would probably win the election. And part of it is they won't let Biden succeed, just like they didn't let
Obama.
succeed.
Well, Bernie Sanders seems to have the truest line of all when he said things are rigged. The system is rigged, very intricately rigged, and
Yeah.
and out of date. It's like we have a out of date system, the electoral college, and I never knew about all this stuff that after the election took place, there were all these other procedures. Were you ever aware of that there are all these key dates that things had to happen? And I thought when the election day happened and they announced who won, that was it.
Yeah.
That was my understanding too.
No, I think I was aware of those dates, but that in the past they were merely formalities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fahrenheit 451 by Michael Moore talked about that a bit. He had he showed Democratic congressmen challenging state totals on, I guess it would have been January the 6th, after Bush beat Gore. So I sort of knew it was there, but I had no idea of its Byzantine intricacy.
Really,
Right.
Really?
Yeah.
and of course, in the days when news had to come by a courier on horseback from far off states, they needed that time.
Yeah.
There was no,
Uh,
no way of getting what happens in Indiana back to Washington instantly.
Yeah, of course. But I just see the Republicans, at least the hardcore Trump people, as just becoming more and more nihilistic. It seems to me this literally rule or ruin. The merits have nothing to do with anything.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They just and the stuff they say is unbelievable.
Mhm.
McCarthy, I mean, my God, where did and I guess the politicians are trapped because the Republican base won't tolerate any deviance from Trumpism. I guess
That,
it's hard
yeah,
to believe.
to me, that is very threatening.
Yeah, I mean, Liz Cheney is sort of, one would think, a conservative Republican's fantasy of a terrific
Mhm.
American politician, civil servant. And, she very probably, I guess, certainly very possibly is going to be purged.
Dead in the water. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens to that and the other guy. What's his name? The other fellow who's on the committee, who's a Republican.
Oh, he's from Illinois.
Yeah.
I can't think of his name.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But, one would hope that, did Trump help the poor white out of work people that he said he would help? And will they still vote for him because of some Jungian archetypal figure that he represents for them, even though he doesn't deliver the goods? All he did was, it's like a sham, but yet the people are so dedicated to him. But I'm wondering if there will be an erosion of support. That's what I'm hoping for, is that he would resoundingly and the other Trumpites go down, because there will be enough thinking independents and other people that say, wait a minute, Trump didn't help with the COVID. He didn't help with jobs, really. He just helped the rich. I don't know. I'm hoping that there would be enough people that would see through that. But
Well, throw in the pro-life movement, who don't care. I mean, they really don't.
Mhm.
They don't care what evil Trump does. He's anti-abortion. He'll appoint anti-abortion judges. But they don't care about anything else.
yeah,
Morally superior as they think themselves to be. But and then throw in Biden is stepping all over his dick every time.
yeah,
Yeah.
He's
And then hand in hand with the pro-life, but not quite coterminous, are the independent freedom worshipers, whose idea of personal freedom
yeah,
means arming yourself against anybody who is perceived as a threat to it. And anybody else whose idea of freedom, personal freedom, involves the freedom to do something else is going to be regarded as an enemy by the gun people.
For the life of me, I can't understand this anti-vaccination obduracy. Well, I see it as obduracy. I don't know. I just can't see it. It just, like the leading cause of death among policemen in the country right now is COVID-19. It exceeds injuries on duty, et cetera, et cetera. And yet the police, or many of them rather, just, no, I'll lose my job before I'll get vaccinated. This is about my bodily integrity, man. They're all talking like pro-abortion feminists.
Yeah.
My body.
The ignoring of those kinds of facts are, I think, what feeds fear in me that they will not, that folks will not say, he didn't get us any jobs. There just seems to be this this iconic belief, in Trump and Trumpism with those folks, and that is scary.
Yeah.
And even people that don't like him, they still rally around the totems of Trumpism.
Mhm.
I have a good friend that just sees him really not much differently than we do, and yet that's how that. And yet, oh no, I mean, Trump didn't put any pressure on the guy in the Ukraine to, investigate Biden. There was no quid pro quo, and I think that's just a given. That's just what's his face, Congressman Schiff's bullshit, and Trump almost admitted it, and but they don't see that.
Mhm.
Well,
they see what they want to see.
Ned, getting back to Cambria, I was, no, but it has to do with Trump. The newspaper, we were up at the Cambria Pines Lodge, staying there. And I remember reading the newspaper that morning. Maybe it was the New York Times. We kind of scoured through the town there to see who would have the New York Times, and there was an article about evangelicals and Trump. And the idea was the top evangelicals kind of said, it's okay that Trump has all these faults and treats women this way and blah, 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 et cetera, because sinners can be converted, by their belief in Jesus. So we give them a pass on all these things. There's that type of thing, George. That's what you're saying.
And he's like Cyrus, Cyrus was a pagan and he probably went to hell, etc. But he let the Jews come back to Palestine.
Mhm.
He was God's instrument,
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Trump is like Cyrus.
And Isaiah even calls him a Messiah, the anointed.
Who does?
I think it's Isaiah calls Cyrus God's anointed.
Well, okay.
We're digging a hole here for us.
I gotta say something. In the office of the readings, I guess it was yesterday, and this has been building towards a theme, is the restoration of Israel, and all the post-Isaiah prophets, I guess, right? And somebody, I don't remember which prophet it was God was speaking through him yesterday, and there's always this Israel, boy, am I going to get you, you faithless slut. But then I won't. Then after all, I love you and I'll restore you, and at least you're remnant, et cetera, et cetera. But there was this passage about.
It sounds like a domestic violence perpetrator.
Yeah.
The way you said it there.
Well, okay. But anyway, and he says, but I'll restore you to your land, and it's just going to be so cool. And old men and old women will, with their staffs for their old age, sit in the sun and in Jerusalem, and it'd be, I don't know. To me, it was like the old Armenian men in the park near me playing
Yeah.
dominoes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Happy as clams, and I just thought it was such a great passage because it's just a line or two, but
Mhm.
it's so appreciative of the human, of being old and having to walk with a cane, but that's the way it should be, and you
Mhm.
should be happy and sit on a stone bench in Jerusalem and
But it,
watch the passersby, and I'm
but
going to do that for you again, God is saying.
Mhm.
but it totally ignores the old women.
No, not in this passage.
Really? It doesn't? Okay, well, that's
Let me,
good.
I can find it. Let me,
That's good.
uh, um,
No, I just heard do you know Nicholas Kristof,
yes,
the columnist?
yeah.
So the latest thing is that are you aware that he's he's resigned from the New York Times and writing his columns. He may run for governor of Oregon, and mentioned his wife. He and his wife did a series of, interviewing Oregonians about what's really happening there, etc. But out of curiosity, I Googled his wife. I don't know if she's Korean or Chinese or she's Asian background. And there was a TED talk by her about 12 or 14 minutes, and it was all about sexism. The whole thing was about women, how they are treated, and the majority, if you take the largest throughout the world, the population, and she has about 4 or 5 little instances of girls who would have turned out this way if it weren't for this, if they weren't given some support to go to school by some foundation funded by people who are wanting to support young women. Kind of like in Afghanistan, there's a young women's orchestra, I think, who were trying to get out of there. Did you read about that in a newspaper that they were
I did see something.
I
about that.
saw something.
being
Yeah.
rescued by groups that had some personal connection with them and were
Mhm.
funding their flights and things like that and trying to work through the red tape and all that. But she talked about the big thing is really women and girls in parts of the world that, here you can say, well, feminism is on the rise and look at that. But I keep thinking of that, it keeps popping into my mind because of it can be so deeply embedded that we aren't even aware of it,
Mhm.
Um,
Back, well, go ahead, George.
well, Georgia, you say we're not aware of the way women are treated in Afghanistan?
No, I'm just saying that even in the scriptures, there's so much mistreatment of women, it's just kind of taken for granted, it's just kind of part of you can read the stories but behind the scenes, there's just a lot of the way women are treated in large parts of the world. Even here with traffickers, I think I'm not aware directly of trafficking, but apparently there's a lot of young girls who are disappeared or taken away and
Right
in
here
our
in
own
this
country.
city.
Yeah,
I'm
in our
told.
own country. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
My granddaughter did.
we think that so much that we have evolved into equality of some sort.
Right.
And then we use that evolution of equality, concept of equality, to go back and judge the past by our terms, and don't allow the past to be what it is as a flawed but real foundation for where we are. And at the same time, we don't really recognize where the cracks are in our own structure. You know, we lament the treatment of women in the scripture and in the church and the history and so on and so forth, but we're not really addressing the fact that right now we are allowing women to be exploited through all sorts of trafficking, manipulated through the kind of advertising that has a feminist veneer, but actually is very sexist. You know, manipulating feminine women's identity to buy certain things for profit of big companies and so on and so forth. You know, we're not really critiquing our own society to the extent that we'd like to critique those of our ancestors, our fathers, shall we say.
And apply our so-called standards to them.
Yeah. The thing, I looked up Isaiah 45 and looked at from the way that evangelicals view Trump. It is a little bit alarming. I just thought there was one verse, but there's 7 verses in which this is what the Lord says to his anointed. This is 45, Isaiah 45. This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of, to subdue nations before him and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you, Cyrus. I will go before you and level the mountains. I will break down the gates of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. I will give you hidden treasures, riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. For the sake of Jacob, my servant, of Israel, my chosen, I summon you by name and bestow on you a title of honor, though you do not acknowledge me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Apart from me, there is no God. I will strengthen you, though you have not acknowledged me, so that from the rising of the sun to the place of its setting, people may know that there is none beside me. I am the Lord, there is no other. I form the light and darkness. I bring prosperity and create disaster. I, the Lord, do all these things. Now, that's what Isaiah has God saying to Cyrus.
Oh, man.
I'm going to use you, Cyrus, for my purposes.
Precisely. You are my anointed, and I will support you. I will go before you. I will make you victorious.
Here's that sentence that struck me. The way I approach this is I'm listening to it. I'm not reading it every morning because, you know, I've got the app and I go for a walk and listen to it, or attempt to anyway. But here's the passage, and Zechariah, thus says the Lord of hosts, now, you know, I'm relenting, you know, I've been pissed, but I'm letting you slide, Israel. Thus says the Lord of hosts, old men and old women, each with staff in hand because of old age, shall again sit in the streets of Jerusalem. The city shall be filled with boys and girls playing in her streets. I just think that's so lovely, you know, just
that's a great image.
Yeah. And, you know, compared to the passages in Isaiah about how the hyenas are going to invade the palace, and where, you know, these women used to, this is Brueggemann's about, used to walk in all their finery, and it ain't going to be that way no more, you know, scorpions and rats and but that's so beautiful. And it's a human constant, you know, that's what everybody wants, is they want old people walking along in our crippledness, enjoying the sun, and while children play nearby, it's sort of on a human level only, the ultimate in happiness, methinks.
It kind of reminds me of some Spanish towns. Did you ever visit in any culture these cities where there's a town center and at night there are people out there talking, playing dominoes, sipping some beverage? People are out and about, maybe in Mexico even, but that
It's
whole,
totally the way Armenia
is it?
And Turkey.
and
too.
I'm talking about
Turkey, yeah.
Yerevan. I'm talking about, Yerevan's a modern city, and I've never seen a place like that. I mean, where a 20-year-old, really good-looking woman, there's no neighborhood in Yerevan that she couldn't walk in at midnight on a Friday night.
Mhm.
It's like, are you serious? Is this fallen humanity?
Yeah,
And it's beautiful.
yeah.
How about this? Thus says the Lord of hosts, in those days, 10 men of every nationality, speaking different tongues, shall take hold, yes, take hold of every Jew by the edge of his garments and say, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. Oh,
Mhm.
I mean, it's poetry is what it is, but how beautiful. And that is just something that so fascinates me about these old Jews is, I mean, whoever wrote this knew that we the Gentiles were going to go to God through the Jews. I mean, this is, I don't know, Zechariah, how many years before Christ? I guess he's after Isaiah. So 300, 400, 500 maybe.
Well, one of the things that impressed me was that so many of these minor prophets that are being read now in the
Right.
liturgy were actually prophesying during the time of Darius, the son of Cyrus. So they were actually encouraging the Jews coming back to restore the temple and to restore their religious allegiance and identity. And I think they were painting a picture of, okay, you're being restored for a purpose. And the purpose is God's purpose to make his name known to the whole rest of the world. So be about your restoration right now, but have trust that God is restoring you for something greater, which of course never really happened until Jesus.
I've been reading two books. I've sort of dropped N.T. Wright's biography of St. Paul, the one I sent you guys copies of, where he's got the black beard and isn't bald on the cover in the painting, because I don't think it's very good. I think Wright was sort of phoning that in. So let me tell you, when Paul went back to Tarsus after being knocked off that horse, he would have gone home, and boy, would his dad not have liked what he was hearing about his little bright, brilliant kid becoming a Christian. I mean, okay, NT, yeah, maybe, but it's
His
clearly,
friends call him Tom.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I just thought it was very lazy. I mean, his footnotes are just citations.
Yeah.
There's no discussion, etc. I'm sure. But I'm also reading a book about Francis of Assisi, because I do that every 5 years or so, and because my dad died on his feast day, and was like him in many ways, and so. Oh hell! I forgot what my point was going to be about St. Francis. Never mind.
Well, maybe it'll come. Frankly, I still haven't found anybody better on St. Paul than Jerome Murphy O'Connor. I keep going back to his Paul, A Critical Life. And then he later wrote a much shorter one, more readable, but not so much technical apparatus, called His Story. But he is the one who, probably more than anybody, situates the life of Paul as being gained first from his letters and then from the Acts of the Apostles written or understood in view of the letters, which I think is fairly common. But then he goes to great pains to situate him in the culture and the geography of his time. And that, that influences the timing of things, the timing of his travels. There are certain times when his travels could have taken place and certain times when they couldn't. And what were the people like that he was writing to? Now, the Galatians were a very, very different people, say, than the Ephesians or the Corinthians or the Philippians. And how does that determine how he writes to them? But I do recommend those two books, Paul, A Critical Life, and then Paul, His Story, as at least my go-to Pauline books.
I'm gonna have to log off.
It's that time.
Yes,
Well, can I ask you guys just one last question?
sure.
I'll be fast. This French scandal about all these abused children, I find the numbers not believable. I mean, according to the survey that's been released, each priest of the perpetrators had molested more than 100 kids. And I know, pedophiles get around, but not to that extent. That's just not credible to me. Has anybody reflected on that?
Yeah, yeah, it just seems mind-boggling. I just, the way statistics are used or developed, I don't know what to think of them, whether they're credible or not. But yeah, I had some of the same sense that you're expressing just by somebody taking, I don't know what that's from, what sampling,
Mhm.
you always
I-
have to examine the sample amount and how people, and I see other things that say 1 out of 4 people are such and such and such and such, and I don't know. I think it's very tricky when you're talking about millions of people, extrapolating out of a small number, but
Yeah,
I
I don't
I don't
believe the famous Pew study that says that only 30% of American practicing Catholics believe in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. I don't think that's true. I don't think it's accurate.
I
I don't
agree.
think it is either because they didn't ask the questions right.
Well,
Yeah.
I haven't read the questions, but I'll bet they didn't.
Mhm.
yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the other study the other document that's been hauled into question even by some rather liberal commentators. I'm trying to remember what the guy's name is, who was former editor of Commonweal.
Cogley,
No, but anyway, he wrote a very
Steinfels.
yeah,
No.
I think so. He wrote a very scathing critique of the Pennsylvania grand jury document as being very, how would I say, slanted. I guess that's the best word to use.
It totally is. I've read most of that. And first of all, they've had two priests have done anything in Pennsylvania since 2002.
Mhm.
And yet all the stories talk about, I forget the numbers now, but what, hundreds of
Yeah.
priests?
Yeah.
Yeah, true. Of
Well,
whom
same
two.
thing at Los Angeles. You look through the list, which is freely available online, and you can very well identify who the 20 or so out of the 300 or so priests were the real perpetrators. And most of the rest, had one or two allegations against them from out of the past. And you look at the documentation from the archdiocese and not, some of it's very, very explicit and detailed, and some of it's sort of, you get the impression, I don't like this guy, so here's what he did.
Yeah. Anyway,
I haven't done a systematic study of that either.
well, I don't know statistics. I never studied it or taken a course in it or anything. But Cyrus Trump, man, here we are.
Cyrus, yep. So to be continued, I presume, next week.
Yes.
So
Okay.
God bless you all, and I'll press the end meeting button.
Okay.
Bye.
Ned, enjoy.
Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Enjoy Cambria,
We
what you
are
have
very
left.
much.
Enjoy
Figure out,
Guys.
enjoy your
Figure-
procedure.
figure out how this relates to Cambria, Ned. Let us know.
Yeah, right.
See you guys.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Okay, for now.
Bye.